Hello, everyone, and welcome to Strange Coordinates, a show where we use brands as compass points to lead to fascinating stories. I'm Robert Balog.
And I'm Aydan Sariakaya. Along with our partner Topher, Robert and I lead an ad agency called Territorial that helps brands find their place in the world. But we're not the only ones who love brands. On Strange Coordinates, we focus on a specific theme and bring a traveling companion along with us on the journey.
And today we're really excited to dive into the world of what it means to be a human in a tech-driven world. So we're all human, as far as we know, unless there's an alien out there listening, in which case, hello, take me to your leader. And thinking about how and why we behave in certain ways is the foundation of the work we do in marketing, brand, creative, and experiences. So whether we're taking the time to fully investigate why through primary research, focus groups, etc., or whether we consume third-party data sources, research is foundational to any strategy exercise.
And we're not going to be exploring this idea alone. Joining us today is someone with a multifaceted background who has been thinking about humans and behavior for decades. He's a former brand strategist from the advertising world, where he worked at big ad agencies, including BBH, Droga, Ogilvy, and McCann on brands like Axe, Levi's, and Johnny Walker. He left advertising to pursue the glamour of the startup world, originally to launch a video co-creation app called Simpler. 2 pivots later, he finds himself in the empathy business and back next to strategists and brands where his company has been enabling them to understand their audiences at a more emotional level. Please join us in welcoming Ben Jenkins.
Hey, Ben, great to have you. Thank you so much for joining us on Strange Coordinates, as Aydan clearly pointed out that we were playing with words there.
Made it real obvious.
Yeah, you really did. Really excited to have you here. We know that, this has been a really exciting moment for you and your company personally, because you've recently gone through a rebrand. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that process, where you started, where you ended up, how you got there, and kick us off into that conversation.
I'd love it. It's great to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good place to talk, especially if we're talking about brands. But in a way, I think I taught myself, after being in this business for 25 years, I taught myself that, and having never done my own brand, that brands are kind of important. And in a funny sort of way, they're even more important when you've got a smaller company than a large one. Because a large company can kind of add meaning to something that's kind of meaningless, like Apple or Google, through advertising. In a small company, your name, your branding are doing so much more heavy lifting that if you've got the wrong one, it's sort of like an annoying younger child at the dinner table correcting you and telling another story while you're trying to tell your story. And I think the impetus for changing in the last few months was that, as you mentioned, when we started out, we just kept the name of the old company, which was Simpler. Simpler was us talking about sampling pop culture. It was a kind of pre-TikTok, pre-Vine, remember that,
Right.
app that was trying to get individuals to be more creative. So there's a little bit of a similarity. That thread has remained, but it was in the age of posting pictures. Could people get better at videos was the original point. And we were like, a simple way of doing sampling of pop culture, memes, GIFs, music, remixing other people's stuff. A few years later, we did a pivot into the world of empathy, as we like to talk about it. But really, it was me revisiting what I used to do as a junior brand strategist or a mid-level brand strategist, which is starting the creative process by understanding human beings. And the best source of that has always been qualitative or ethnography or conversations or getting into people's homes and underwear drawers and fridges and wherever else. It's kind of like inner worlds. And Simpler at the time was like, it doesn't matter. I've been in branding for years. Google and Apple could do it, so it's fine. We don't need to change the name yet. And what happened was that it coincided with an era of efficiency and simplicity and frictionless and all those horrible words that don't work with humanity. And so we accidentally, while we were banging on about play and joy and fun and bringing out the weirdness of humanity and messiness, and our brand was sitting there, it walks into the room before you, it sits on a call in a calendar before you get there. It then sits saying simple, efficiency. And then when you leave 3 months later, when someone remembers, should we get in touch with those people, the name pops up and does its stuff again. So that was the impetus. It was like, our name is not just not helping us, it's doing us a disservice.
Right.
That taught me something in the last 6 months about brands I'd never really considered.
Mm-hmm. And so in your role as a brand strategist, you worked at places like Droga, you worked at Ogilvy, and many times you don't really get to engage with brands at that level, at those organizations. You're dealing with brands that are well established, they've been around for years. You're not really looking at what is kind of like core to that what's deep at the nucleus of that. You're dealing with decades of communication and brand equity that have built up over time. And so you actually had an ability to, probably it was a new exercise for you, because there's just not a thing that anybody ever asked of you necessarily at, when you're serving a large brand like that.
Well, I mean, I think I actually did a very old-fashioned process to get to this. So the new thing was doing it on ourselves. So having me as the client and the strategist at the same time, which was a nightmare.
Yeah.
And so the new thing was doing it on myself. It's like a doctor vaccinating themselves. Really difficult. The going into who the consumer is at a core, the customer at a core emotional inner world. That wasn't any different. In fact, I even stole Unilever's brand key process. Have you ever come across that? Of
course.
I worked on for years to start the process, because it's and Diageo's dweeb process. And so I even started with some nerdy old tools that these big brands use. And I had worked on inventing new brands. At BBH, I ran a division called ZAG, where we brought up brands from scratch. And we had a process there called the brand lag process, like where there is a sort of white space for something. So I had done this, but it starts with research, so we ate our own dog food. Sure. Perhaps in the B2B world, which is essentially what we are, it's harder, but actually I sort of bucked the trend a little bit and thought about, and this is why I think we've got to a place that's resonated with people. We thought about what is the emotional state that our big clients are in, and they sort of bifurcate a little bit. There's people like you're one of our clients, so strategists at the cooler agencies, to be honest, if I'm really honest, like the BDAs, as I call them, probably think that they have these big data streams and they need to be talking to the IT people at their client companies. But then it's the CMIs at the big organizations. But in both cases, they have emotional needs as well. They both need to look smart and invent things in record time. So there was an emotional part of this, which is how do we stay, and it sort of comes back to humanity. How do we stay a useful human in the room in this world that has so much technology and so much data, by the way, that and keep people interested? What gives us a role to be in the room? And so kind of triggering people's humanity and their creativity it fell out of that identification of consumer or customer.
And I guess you could say that there's potentially also a shift in terms of market research and data and the way that people have been talking about it, right? In recent history, it all went into everybody needs to own their first party data. Now everybody's adding in all of their AI tools so that they can actually ingest all the data that they've never integrated for the past 15 years or what have you, right? So are you also seeing a shift in terms of how your customers of Simpler are using your data and your services?
Yes. And I think that shift has happened. There's been two during our time. And that's, I think, why we got sucked into the world of simplicity and efficiency in the first few years. And this really is the sort of enemy we've been fighting against, which is when I came back into advertising, where I'd sort of left, for the best part of a decade, I looked, and some of my favorite clients, Unilever was one of my best clients. I worked on Axe for several years. And we did some really cool ethnographic stuff in order to understand mating rituals for the Axe effect, or Bertolli, where we understood aging, and around olive oil, or Vaseline, where we understood deep workers. And I noticed when I came back, we're like, we don't need quality anymore. Qual's old school. We're just going to plug all these data sources in. In the process, that creates an unintended consequence, which is all the people you're then bringing into your organization are based on who's really good at operating machinery. And you know who's really good at operating machinery? People that are a bit like machines. And so all of a sudden you've got a bunch of machines, drones, robots in your organization.
Right.
And no one's bucking the trend. No one's looking for the anomalies. So very proudly, they're flaunting the size of their data and how much and how quick and how, cheap it is, but no one's talking about any new ideas. And another example here of the opposite. Like I spoke to the CEO of not VCCB, they're another good one, but FCB the other day. And I was like, why are you winning all this creative awards? FCB didn't used to be one of these cool companies. And they're like, yeah, that's why, because we were digital before everybody else. We spent a few years before everybody plugging in the data. And so while the big cool agencies were playing catch up, they took their eye off the creative ball. So they brought in all these people. Essentially, IT started outranking creative. And this is me being sort of like deliberately provocative, but I worked at Ogilvy for a very short period of time for this reason. But they had an elevator system, 11 floors, and it was ranked. Your status was where you sat. Do you remember this?
I was on 11, of course.
The chocolate factory. IT sat at the bottom. Yeah. And you'd look at people in the elevator who got out first. You're like, oh, right. And it was IT is sitting on the 11th floor a little bit too much these days. And partly because IT was given the job of data. And nobody understands the difference between insight or epiphanies or creative inspiration and data.
Yeah.
And data, you can house your data with IT. Thank you very much. But please don't sit in on debriefs. And unfortunately, for the last 10 years, that's what happened. So the impetus for us was to go, how can we bring that deep, creative inducing, empathetic, even instinct using form of human understanding back into the core of the business, because without that, you're just all going to be saying the same things. You might as well all just run everything off MRI, Simmons, and Mintel. So that was our impetus to start in the first place.
And I realized we haven't actually said where you ended up. Where did you land for your new brand?
Oh yeah, I haven't said. This was the hardest point. The naming was the hardest point. And actually, even the name itself, you can almost feel that drudgery in it. We've ended up going, okay, human. And the tone with which you say it adds so many different layers of meaning. There's the, okay, human, which is my favorite, which is you can walk up to anyone and go, okay, mustache, nice to you, and that's the most important part, which is so much, especially because of tech mediation, we don't see each other. We're sitting here now in 2D. I'm, trying to figure out based on your bookshelf and your background and, and your, facial topiary. And I'm trying to, and I spend a lot of time doing that, trying to read humans. And data doesn't care about humans. It cares about the tags on the humans. And what we were trying to do is read all the other stuff. We want to get them into that place so that we've got more stuff to read. So we want them to be as silly as hell. I remember I was in a famous but won't be named cult / professional coaching place for a couple of years. And one of the things they taught us was that you need to take the alcoholic into therapy. If you're only bringing the person who doesn't want to be an alcoholic, therapy is no use. And it's the same with in qual research, IDIs or ethnography. You want all of their crazy in the therapy seat. Otherwise, what are you talking to? Like, the people making decisions are irrational, crazy loons. So we don't want to be talking to the rational ones in research. And that's the problem with data and quant and surveys and even social listening. Well, you find crazies on social listening as well. But it's a specific type of crazy. They are performatively crazy or outraged. They're either boasting or perfect. Or they're a certain type of crazy. It doesn't not the guilty pleasures kind of crazy, not the vulnerable, not the non-performatively vulnerable anyway. So that was sort of what Okay Human is about. And there's other ones, obviously there's the Radiohead reference, there's everyone's talking okay AI, okay Google, okay computer. But has anyone stopped to say okay human again? We're kind of racing ahead without them. And the final one is sort of there's others. The other is just, it's okay to be a human. In fact, it's quite necessary to be a human right now. The ones that remain and hang on to it and bring more of it might actually end up keeping their job.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting discussion I've gotten into recently with some of my friends. We've been talking about how AI has been implemented into their organizations. So a few of my friends work at, some of these big technology organizations, and there are a lot of requirements in terms of utilization of AI in your daily workflow. And this person sits at kind of the mix of technology and creative. They're in a UX product position, right? Which I think is like the perfect blend of technicality and creative. And they were talking about how they were struggling a little bit with how forceful and how much requirement has been on the AI side versus actually the human validation and the work that you go through as a UX researcher to understand that design that you're putting forward. All of that additional thought and testing that you do was essentially being bypassed because the AI was spitting out, a prototype or whatever it might be. So given that you guys are in a technology space and you've made this move back into humans and empathy, but AI is very much of the moment, can you tell us a little bit more about how you all are balancing AI and that conversation in your workflow?
Yeah, because a lot of my chat at the moment is sort of is more on the rebalancing.
Yeah.
I feel like we've had a decade and a half before AI that came in and kind of like, turned us into the robots. So before the real robots show up, we need to kind of remember how to be human. But I think there's a role for AI in that as well. In fact, I think there is, and we're doing it across the entire process. So one of them is, and I was talking to someone this morning who's exactly my age, and I feel as though I grew up in a really privileged time where it was the beginning of the 21st century when I started my job. And I worked in a company that told me to carry on being a big kid, though it was in their interest and mine to stay childlike. And I think I just got in, even though it was the dot-com boom, I just got in under the radar before tech kind of beat out all of our humanity and forced us to be just as machine-like. Have you ever worked with a coder where you're like, don't talk to me like that. Don't talk to me so laterally. Stop. Tell me in epics and stories, please. And you're like, no, I don't understand you. You're like, oh. And I feel like while we're not all working with coders, we are working with things that are forcing us to talk in these tiny machine-like ways. I think I'm just lucky enough to have spent a large part of my early career sitting in, creative offices with unhinged individuals.
Completely.
Trying to be more unhinged than they are. And I got a Chucky drop for it. I got a gold star. They're like, well done, keep going. And just before the great robotization of the workforce happened, I grew up and was like, okay, I don't need to change necessarily. And so while I think my brand almost changed and became SaaS and automated and scale, and I didn't. And so what we're doing is trying to remind people of those nearly forgotten skills. So right from the briefing, we don't want it to be a brief. Briefs are for kind of, police officers and, and lawyers. We want it to start a conversation because the very first thing you talk about is the first moment of the creative process. So everything should be a bit unhinged. How you conceive of the challenge, you should be starting to think laterally from that first moment. So we've got AI in there, nudging people into that. We've got it in the field work. So we communicate inside chat messaging, which affords us the ability to be much more silly because no one's in a room full of other strangers. No one's got a pair of human eyes looking back at you. 1 minute you're talking to grandma on Facebook Messenger. Next minute we're talking to you about love and romance as well. So there's no code switching required. So as a result, we can throw more fun and games at them and probe and nudge and project and do all of those like art therapy and music evocation and all that. All that used to be awkward as hell in focus groups, ideas.
Yeah.
You're like, oh God, you're going to make me do idea. Are you going to make me do arts and crafts right now in front of these strangers? But here they're like, sure, I'll dress up in a lens of a mouse and talk to you about cheese. In fact, I'll say much more about cheese when I'm a mouse than I will when I'm a human. So it helps there, but the biggest place it helps is in the analysis. So the magic happens in a creative brief or a strategic unlock or a repositioning of a brand when you stop seeing what everybody else has been seeing. And for me, that always happened, often in a taxi on the way home from a focus group or on the train while doing, traveling the world in ethnographies. Here it happens because we talk to so many more people. The downside originally was like you talk to 100 people and there's like 50 questions and they all answer more than much longer verbatims. How am I ever going to get through any of that?
Yeah.
We're now using AI to not just do the efficiency stuff, but to ask the most crazy questions of it. And when you are that nosy like I am and you keep probing and you keep probing, eventually the data will give up some inner truth about what people are frightened of. And if you don't trust it because you think it might be making it up, ask it for 20 quotes that substantiate it. And so we grew up as strategists in our era being very cynical, never kind of accepting. And if you're more qual-minded, you have to be even more cynical because the quant people come in and go, well, we've got 1,000 people.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not true.
Right.
So you had to fight.
Based on our statistical relevance, not quite right. Yeah.
Well, our critical thinking tools are sharper than theirs. So now we've got something that could be lying to us and hallucinating. We're fine with that because we were always playing around with lack of clarity and the need for triangulation. So I think this is kind of reanimating us, to be honest. You do need to nudge people to say it's okay, human. It's okay. You can go crazy again on this stuff. Doesn't matter if you're wrong the first time. I think that's what we've lost in the last 10 years. We think that all these tools are so clever and right that the comfort with being wrong has eroded. And that's what we're allowing people to do, a place to play, be silly and wrong.
Yeah. I think
we're bringing the art back to the science.
Yeah.
Yes.
It feels like we also started to equate data volume with certainty, and that if it was measurable, it was true. And that is just not the case. I think there's something really interesting in what you were saying about kind of lateral thinking. And you mentioned play as being encouraged in the agency life of the 2000s and the mid 2000s. And I was on the same timeline. And I thought play was part of it, but also it was just a reminder that, especially as a creative, you were the vehicle. If I was exposed to a brief about mutual funds, the creative was a result of me having a feeling about that thing. And so it passing through me and coming out as creative was the magic. That was all there was to it. There was no science, really. It was just, I read a brief. I remembered a time when I was a kid that I experienced this thing that triggers a relationship in my brain to something else that gives me a happy feeling, and that turned into a creative idea. And like you as the vehicle was critically important. You could not be taken out of the process. I still think that's true. That you can't remove the human from that process of internalizing, connecting, associating, outputting. There's no substitute for that. There's just isn't anything that exists in technology that can do that.
I completely agree. And I think someday someone will decide that is a science, actually.
Right.
But yeah, what you're describing is the job of an artist from, Shakespeare to Picasso. It was my job, and it still is, to trigger those feelings because you can't always get out there. That's the thing that we stop doing when we put too much machinery in the process. There's already a process in this, but it's a human to human process. My favorite times was I took the creative directors to Eastern Europe to study the mating rituals of axe consumers, and it was so much more fun because there are no greater empaths than creatives. They cared so much. It's an anomaly. It's a myth that they that they don't like data. It's just the wrong data. This
Right.
data that has been peddled for the last 15 years
Totally.
isn't real data. Like the data that is like, oh, that memory, that so long as it's transmitted through poetry and metaphor and joy and play, that's the data that triggers really good art, essentially.
Yeah, 100%. I also think it's interesting that like in the AI debate, we're kind of repeating the same patterns between like we're marveling at AI because we, oh, look how well it replicates Hemingway. But at the same time, what we're really interested in is the fact that it's compressed time so much. Like what we're really marveling at is the efficiency, because it isn't doing anything that we haven't done already. It's just doing it in a time frame that is so much faster. And so we're fetishizing efficiency again and forgetting about quality and the fact that it's not going to be, you're not going to create an AI Hemingway that doesn't exist yet, whoever the next, Hemingway is. It's going to just sort of take from what we've done, compress time, and put it out faster. And so, I think that there's a little bit of the same thing happened in, when we started to think about digital advertising and about using digital tools to create art in ways that it was, used to have to cut out actual physical pieces of art and put them on top of each other. And, we're sort of repeating the same pattern again.
Yep.
And forgetting that the kind of thing that holds it all together is that spark we just can't capture any other way.
Yeah, I heard this great podcast the other day about us fetishizing things, and I think you're right. Right now, it is technology that drives efficiency. Efficiency has been the underlying thing we've fetishized since the Victorians, maybe before that.
Yeah.
I blame the Victorians for most things.
Yeah.
And the problem is, what we do is we keep swinging from one thing to fetishize to the next. Like we need, the Enlightenment got rid of God to fetishize. So since then, we've had to fetishize the latest omnipotent, powerful force.
Right.
And every now and then that's humans again, and then we kind of go, oh, you can't do that, cancel them. 1 minute they're heroes, next minute they're in prison. And maybe in some cases that's great, but can't we just cool it a little bit on like needing something to kind of unthinkingly worship?
Right.
Yeah.
Somebody said this morning, I was on this call with someone who found us because of the new brand. They're like, we really need to talk.
Amazing.
And he said this quite early on. I loved it. It was, we polished out inefficiencies in so many places that we've now left with the biggest one to polish out, which is humans. And it's scary. Like when you fetishize efficiency, the logical end of that is you don't need us.
Right. Yeah. I just want to point out also, this is maybe the second time we've mentioned the death of God on this podcast. And I think we're probably not making ourselves any friends amongst the religious community, but it's all just in the pursuit of intellectual
well, to be honest,
exploration.
I wasn't brought up, I wasn't even christened, but to be honest, maybe that's one of the solutions, bring it back.
Right. Yeah. Let's get all religious about it. Have a good old revival.
It's coming. Spirituality is coming back in some ways anyway. But having some form of something else that's not technology to worship, along with all these things, maybe it will like dampen our need for this. We need social apparently, and the sacral is the other one. We will always need something to worship, and when you take out God, you will have something, and often that might be worse. Because at least thou shalt not steal and honor thy neighbor. Don't covet your friend's wife were ultimately quite good.
Better than thou shalt not have a 4-day work week or, whatever.
Yes, exactly. Thou shalt
must work every weekend.
Yeah.
Thou shalt not give money to overseas aid. That's what we're worshiping now.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think it's time for the segment we'd like to call Off-Brand. So basically, in this segment, I'm going to ask you 3 questions related to the work you do in plumbing the depths of consumer sentiment and consumer research. Again, I'm not going to say there's no wrong answers, because there's definitely wrong answers, but there's no penalty for wrong answers.
The wronger, the better, I think.
Yeah, and I actually realized this first one's going to be maybe a bit of a gimme, because I didn't clock that you and I were at Ogilvy, I think probably around the same time. So this was I think known to most folks at Ogilvy, but it's a multiple choice question. So you've got a 33% chance of getting it right.
Okay.
So Canadian shredded wheat cereal brand Shreddies, okay, you know already, created a famous campaign in which they exposed focus groups to a breakthrough product innovation. What was that innovation? Was it A?
Diamond Shreddies.
Hold on, I'm proud of these though. Hold on, let me just read through.
Sorry, I ruined the plan.
Okay, A, was it gooey Shreddies, which are filled with pockets of freeze-dried maple syrup that dissolve into milk? B, Diamond Shreddies, which are the square-shaped cereal turned 45 degrees. Or C, Shreddy Confetti, which is a sprinkling of multicolored frosted shredded wheat that you can put over yogurt. And your answer, sir?
Diamond Shreddies.
That's
And
correct.
It's not because I worked at Ogilvy, because I was only there 6.5 months.
Wow.
Yeah. We can talk about that in another conversation. But it was Rory Sutherland's TED Talk.
Oh, of course, right. Yeah, Rory. Yeah. Okay, so Aydan, you may not. This is a campaign from around 2008, 2009.
Okay.
This was Shreddies was a heritage brand in Canada. They had been experiencing massive market share loss. People just kind of didn't think about them anymore, and so the campaign that came out was essentially packaging the exact same product as Diamond Shreddies, but it's a square, and they just turned it sideways. And so the campaign was a series of focus groups that were exposed to regular Shreddies versus Diamond Shreddies next to one another, and asked to give their impressions of the new product and what it made them think, what it made them feel, if they thought it was better. And just across the board, people responded to the Diamond Shreddies as being somehow superior to the original Shreddies. And so it just became this thing. They basically had this massive swing in market share. Well, they came back with like a 30% swing or something like that, and re-energized their business through basically repackaging. And then they did like a mixed box that had both.
It was the same dimensions,
It
right?
was the same Shreddy.
Same product.
Okay. I'm like,
This is
just trying to confirm.
This is an exercise in postmodernism and breaking the fourth wall, because I truly don't think it's got anything to do with them believing it. Even in Canada, I truly believe that they were just like, well done for
Right.
taking the piss out of advertising.
Yeah.
And we like you a bit more now. That's ultimately what we're trying to do, which is like, you're more likable now because you just exposed the bullshit
Right.
of all advertising.
I also thought that, yeah, and you could also see in those commercials, you could see the pressures that we all kind of bemoaned in the focus group, which is sort of like groupthink. When you're being asked a question by a professional, you feel like you need to have an answer, and you probably want that answer to be in the affirmative. And so people were just kind of like feeding that back.
Yeah.
But it was just an amazing campaign to begin with. It was phenomenal. Okay, good. You're 1 for 1 so far.
Yes.
All right, this is the second question. This is also multiple choice. So Lego launched the Lego Friends line in 2012 with the intent to create a line that was especially for girls. And they had conducted a 4-year trial of market research that studied the play habits around 3,500 girls and their mothers. So prior to the release of the Friends line, what percentage of children who played with Lego were girls according to Lego's own internal data? Was it A, 9%, B, 24%, or C, 18%?
Well, because you put the two of them very close to each other, I'm thinking it's going to be one of those two. So I'm going to go for the middle one, 18%.
Okay, it is actually a 9%.
Wow.
So 9%.
Lego, not for girls.
Not for girls for many decades. So they obviously had a massive problem, right? So they did this study. It was a global study. Like I said, there were 3,500 participants in the study. And kind of what they uncovered in this study was that when girls played with construction toys, they thought a lot about the inside of what they're making. So it wasn't just about, is the wall sturdy? What's the shape? It was more about what's going into this space. What is it like? They were also interested in the sort of details of the thing. It wasn't just about size, volume, mass. It was really just about details. And relationships were super, super important. And so they released the Friends line, had a very, very different form factor than the regular Legos. They have had massive growth, they say, in those demographics. They haven't released the demo numbers, but Lego has leaned into the Friends line for the last 12 years, and they say that they've increased that play dramatically amongst girls. Which is like, you've got 9%, you got only one way to go on that. Like, Jesus.
You're just going to go up.
In hindsight, that was a better answer, because that's why they spent all that money on.
I mean,
that's a huge, that's a very small percentage that you should be able to grow.
I mean, does it track, like, anecdotally, does it track with y'all? Like,
I played with Legos.
Did you?
We were Legos, Connects, Playmobil, but then I was thinking about Playmobil, because that is very much like, you're creating a scene, right? Like, we had the surgeon's office.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys played with those. And they had all the little, like, tiny little, like, tools for the surgeon. And I do remember really liking that. So I guess maybe there's something to be said around the scene that you're building, or like what's happening inside versus just this like external shape. But no, I was one of those 9%. I was a Lego girl.
Oh, nice. Amazing. Okay. Well, last question. You got one, you missed one. This one is a true or false. So true or false, Robert K. Merton, who you may know as the father of the focus group, changed his last name from Skolnick to Merton because as a young man, he was a magician and he thought it sounded like Merlin. Is that true or is that false?
I'm going to go with true.
That is true. Ding, 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 ding. You are correct.
I got 66% on my exam.
Amazing. Yeah, that's passing, right? Isn't that?
That's pretty good.
Yeah,
passing.
I think so.
That's a C+.
All right, so for our listeners who don't know, Robert Merton was an American sociologist who was basically considered the founding father of modern sociology. One of his achievements is developing the focus group method that he actually created in the 1940s when he was working with the U.S. government to try to find an answer to Nazi propaganda. So they were looking to understand why people were responding to the way they were to messages that they were receiving. And so he developed this, what we now know as the kind of focus group method, to get people to sort of talk through how they were receiving propaganda, basically, and how the U.S. could better counter that propaganda. And so that led to, me behind a two-way mirror looking at how people were responding to Perrier ads 50 years later. So
eating loads of M&Ms.
Yeah, loads and loads of M&Ms, and nodding knowingly, and then kind of groaning when your work gets tanked. But yes, but yes, he was a magician as a boy, and then decided that he wanted his last name to sound like Merlin.
I love that. I'm writing that, both the Lego and this one down, because I think the fact that it was invented, this whole field, by a magician, which is all about, I think it really helps. We just did a big presentation in Berlin where it was all about the Alice in Wonderland theme, which is what is missing and has been missing for the last 15 years in the process of brand creativity has been magic.
Well, we have one more game for you, Ben, before we wrap up. And this can go as far away from our theme as you wish. So feel free to do something that we haven't even talked about today. But we're going to play the Omnipotent Brand Manager. So you've been promoted to the most powerful brand manager in the history of creation for the span of a single project. You can do anything. What brand would you work with, and what would you do?
So I'm gonna use my Englishness here to come for something that if an American did it, they would upset everyone. So because I want to look at brand America, not from the perspective of politics, because I don't want to get into so back to a brand is about a series of perceptions, and a brand exists in the minds of consumers. If it doesn't, it's not a brand. And I was a consumer. I'm a power user of America that grew up in the 80s. So I saw America at a really good time. And I've bought into America for 17 years because that's how long I've lived here, and I haven't gone back. And it's done things for me that my own country couldn't have done. I love the UK. I love being British, especially in other countries. Much more fun being British in America than it is being in your own country. But I haven't forgotten the wow that I felt about America when I was a kid. And I think, again, maybe there's a privilege of growing up in that time when everything red, white, and blue, even though my own flag is red, white, and blue, and France and Netherlands is as well. Everything was cool. It wasn't British cool. It was American cool. It's from Evel Knievel jumping over buses to Wonder Woman to really cool brands. You know, Pepsi was like the attacking Coke, and it was this unironic, unfettered, happy clappy like positivity and shininess. Everything was shiny and it worked and it was big and it was fun and but it was necessarily naive as well. And so when I was a teenager, it was cool to think America was ridiculous, but it carried on doing very American things and people still wanted it. The dollar is still strong today, even though there's been 20 years of everyone going, what's wrong with this country? And including from the inside. I had this theory that I've never said in public before. So I'm going to...
exclusive.
Called post-ironic America. And I don't want to get too close to the bone, but around about 2001, I think, America found its irony. And, other countries have had it because they had periods of feeling vulnerable, declined empires from the Greeks are cool as hell because they're like the granddaddies of empire, but they're so far away from it that they've kind of just chilled. They're like the sleeping lion on the savannah. No one can beat them at the kind of them and the Egyptians at the British only lost it 80 years ago, really 90, 100 years ago. But they've got that cynicism that they developed in the 50s and 60s, and because they're like, they were not in charge anymore. America has this childlike ebullience and positivity that when you put it in other areas of the world was really good for it. It's like the one person in the sitcom that was always just upbeat and cheered you up. And for me, the moment, and I've always thought it was a good thing until I'm talking about this now. I was like, oh, I love it. Finally, America gets irony, because the internet, it's the long tail of the internet. Now people from marginalized communities can be famous. It's not just the man running media. It's now all the people poking fun through memes and internet. And I was like, that's a good thing because my humor's finally in this country. But actually, it's not a good thing for your brand because you need that happy, clappy, naive positivity at all costs with a flag that unites. It's a mammoth task. I know you've had your problems. It's a mammoth task to this bigger landmass with this many types of communities. At one point there were people speaking different languages in the same country, and yet they all rallied around, 4th of July and Thanksgiving and felt like one entity. That's a really difficult task. And it's the best thing America has. And the moment it invites in cynicism, all brands need a bit of an enemy. Your enemy was monarchy. And in the absence of monarchy as an enemy, you'll attack other forms of authority. And you can see that happening on the right with Anthony Fauci or whoever. It's also happening on the left with the right, that was the authority. It's like we need to find another authority that you can rally around and agree on not liking, because I think cynicism doesn't fit the American brand. However clever you are, do it in a different way. Leave that to the French and the Brits. But America needs to be unequivocally optimistic.
It's interesting because you got the 80s version of America, which was a very particular version. It was obsessed with the 50s. So if you remember that Happy Days was on Laverne and Shirley, the sitcom world was the world of the 50s. So it was like a retelling of the 50s, which was held to be a kind of, emblematic of...
It was your boom time.
It was also, Reagan jingoistic, pretty pure in terms of like good versus evil.
Who's also from the 50s.
Right. And what's interesting, I think, is that what you're seeing now is that the the time that we're kind of reimagining is the 90s now. And I'll be really interested to see what that reimagining of the 90s in American culture does to us, our kind of culture moving forward. Because in many ways, the 90s was a really great time to be in America. We are triumphantly celebrating the fall of the Berlin
Mm.
Wall. We had, there were books written called The End of History, and that we had kind of vanquished the Hegelian dialectic that said we were going to be struggling idea against idea for all time. And we were feeling pretty good about ourselves. And I'm curious how that's going to inform like a forward-looking image about who we are as a brand. What does that say about, what we're looking for moving forward as a brand?
Well, I would argue that, yeah, I've been thinking about the 90s a lot recently because when you look back at it, that's sort of when I came of age, and it was like we were so naive. We honestly thought we'd
Jesus
solve
Jones,
everything.
like,
So clever.
yeah,
We thought I've been listening to 90s comedy, and it's so smug in how everything's fine now.
yeah.
And it was actually missing some cynicism, actually. But
Mm-hmm.
I think that on the right, I mean, Trump is trying to redo the 80s more than the 90s.
Yeah.
I think that was his time. With his McDonald's consuming, TV watching, like he's obsessed still with mainstream TV.
Right.
By the 90s, we'd sort of like moved into like late night, we'd gone a little bit off the grid by the 90s. That's even before the internet got into full swing. So maybe the left is looking at the 90s a bit more. And even then, I don't know if Gen Z would agree that much of what was then, which was kind of all a bit too smugly naive and perfect, is in any way related to now.
No, I mean, it's the United Colors of Benetton version
Yes.
of history.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There's also the sense that, I think Trump is trying to bring the 80s back, but I don't think he's being successful in terms of really capturing that. He has his Golden Dome initiative, which is essentially Reagan's Star Wars. He's trying to bring that back. Nobody gives a shit. Like, honestly, he can't get anybody to care about that. So I think that the level of like existential distress that the 80s kind of had, which I'm sure you grew up in, it was just feeling like there was the real possibility that everything would be annihilated in an instant. I feel like everything's gonna be annihilated, but it's gonna be long and slow, and it'll look a lot like The Last of Us. You know what I mean? I think that's what we're dealing with now.
Yeah, I think if anything, I feel like we might be revisiting a more sinister 50s of McCarthyism that's starting to come in versus the happy clappy, version of it that used to be in like, whatever, Karate Kid and things like that.
I think you're right, because there is also, Robert knows this about me, I'm big into theater, and one of the biggest shows on Broadway this spring was the stage production of Good Night and Good Luck, which they also streamed on TV, which I also watched. And that entire show, sorry, I'm also going to give a spoiler, so, leave before this next 5 seconds. But essentially that whole show is about McCarthyism and, the news and how they kind of exposed the lies and whatever, that whole transition. But at the end of the show, of the stage production, they did do a video montage kind of over the past 20 years or so. And it has a lot of these really intense, very charged moments that we've had even just in the last election cycle. And I'm sure all of you can imagine some of the images that go up on the screen. And it is this like smack in the chest a little bit when you watch it. And it helps to draw that parallel between what's happening today in the 50s. So anyway, a lot of art seems to be asking that question as well.
I think it's interesting though. Sorry, Ben, go ahead. I was just
you mentioned Hegel, and I'm like, it really is. It's like we aren't that, invincible. It will swing back, and the harder the swing in one direction, the harder.
Yeah.
Our job is to be just a bit more moderate each time.
Right.
If the swing doesn't.
The swings aren't as bad.
Not as extreme.
Yeah. You get that smack in the face. You're like, oh, God, of course it's going to come back.
I think the good night, good luck thing is really indicative of what Ben was talking about, which is that this sort of desire for a time in which there was efficacy. Like, good night and good luck is about Murrow standing up and basically, saying, I'm going to use this like platform to put an end to this, pernicious behavior. and it's just it's like wishful thinking at this point. It's like, it's just not, we're not there. That's not the place we're in. It is like Gorbachev saying, or Reagan saying, Gorbachev, tear down that wall. We don't have the unanimity of purpose to make that a possibility anymore. And I feel that like it is a bit strange that Clooney is kind of like trying to resurrect that, which he did during wasn't it originally during the Bush years when that came out?
Yeah, I think that's when the movie came out.
Yeah.
I think you're right.
And it's like, I get it,
Yeah.
but like, that's just more, I've been talking a lot about boomer magic lately, and how this is sort of like, we try to fight boomer magic with boomer magic. And I don't know that boomer magic works anymore. And that to me feels very boomer magic.
Yeah.
Speaking of cynicism.
I mean, we're Gen X. I'm assuming you are as well.
Of course,
and so we're all about cynicism.
I'm a millennial.
That's right.
I assume that.
We're the best generation.
I actually think millennials have got more in common with boomers than Gen X, to be honest.
Yes, indeed.
You always jump to generation. And I think we don't want boomer magic. We do want historical magic.
Yeah, for
I think
sure.
that's why understanding that there's a mathematics to it eventually, that it will swing back. And if it hasn't yet, it's going to any moment. Like there's a sort of beauty to the way things swing back and forward. And if you're not recognizing it, it's going to hurt you harder than if you do. So if you're fascinated by history and you expect it to come back, then you're more ready for it when it does.
Right. Well, Ben, we have really taken quite the journey today. We appreciate you going along on this with us. It's fitting we end on the mention of magic, because I think in many ways that has been a topic we've talked about throughout the day, which is sort of the magic of being human and the indispensable magic of a human feeling something, processing something, communicating something, creating something. So really, really excited that you were able to join us and talk about that today. It was a really great podcast, even though I may have turned us down a cynical alley at the end.
Yeah, this is the problem with America, you know? You people are not supposed to do cynicism.
I know.
And thank you so much to everybody for joining us. To learn more about Territorial and how we help brands find their place in the world, you can visit us at our website at www.weareterritorial.com and follow us on LinkedIn. We will also link more about Ben and OK Human in our show notes. We'll see you soon
Thanks so
on the
much.
next one.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.